of you.
Good morning, happy Sabbath. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for another Sabbath. Thank you for bringing us together via Zoom, that we can study your word. We are studying 𝘃𝗶𝗴𝗲𝗿, and it's very good for us to go back over the truths that have been revealed so that we can hopefully glean new truths, refresh our minds on what we have learned, and so that we will be able to better understand the future that is yet to come. We are living in serious times, and we want to understand what is happening around us and where we stand in time. Thank you for blessing us. Thank you for blessing everyone who is gathering now on the Sabbath, and be with us with your Holy Spirit. Be also with the children, that they may have a blessed lesson where they will learn something as well. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen. Okay, we have been studying 𝘃𝗶𝗴𝗲𝗿. 𝘃𝗶𝗴𝗲𝗿 is tracing Paul's last journey from Caesarea to Rome. Rome is the final destination, but the journey is split into two parts on two different ships. And we know that we are taking these stories as a parable for to learn lessons for our time. We've learned that nothing in the Bible is nothing just stands there without a purpose. And so there are histories or stories in the Bible that might, at face value, you might think, oh, what is the moral lesson I can glean from that story? But when we go into the structures of these stories, they give us a framework to understand, at last we can even glean truths from texts that we might think they don't really have a purpose. If you think of the verse of the 276 souls, for example, there is a random verse somewhere in the middle of the story that tells you, oh yeah, and by the way, on the ship we had 276 people, and the normal Adventist or an average Adventist would probably not stop and think about what this is telling them. But if we take these stories as parables, we will be surprised what we can gather from information that looks superfluous at first. So we know these stories, or these two ships, they are a parable for two institutions, Adventism and the US. So far, we traced the journey of the first ship. That was a ship of Adramyttium. We read about it in 𝘃𝗶𝗴𝗲𝗿 verses 1 to 5. It takes us from 1989, the time of the end, which we marked, or it takes us from Caesarea to Myra. And that is what we mark as 1989 to the Sunday law. The ship of Adramyttium, its name means to abide in death, or I shall abide in death. So this ship, it tells us a clearly negative, or it has a negative meaning. So we are tracing the history of both Adventism and Adventism and the US. They are both born at the beginning of the line, or let me, no, that's now confusing. The ship of 𝗏𝗡𝗏 tells a negative story. It tells the story about the institutions, the US and Adventism, who decide to abide in death. And we saw that these institutions, they got a warning message, but they rejected it. They chose to abide in death. And at the end of the line, we saw that there was an overthrowing taking place. Both the institution of the US and Adventism will be overthrown between Panem, or what is marked here as the midnight cry, and the Sunday law. So we're not going to repeat that line in detail. I just wanted to, I've put it on the board just to, whenever you want to refresh your mind on it, that you can. But now we also want to, this time, in this presentation, we want to focus on the second ship. And we're going to see we can draw parallels between those lines. What I did want to do is show you a map, because I always find it's nice to have a visual when I hear about all these names of these places, and it really helps me to see it so that I can better picture what that journey looked like. I'll just share my screen with you. So that's a map that I found on the internet. Hope you can all see it now. Is it big enough? So here at the beginning, you see where the first ship started in Caesarea. It went to Sidon. There was a short stop. Paul went off the ship. He even met some friends. It was refreshing for him. They tarried a little. That would be the second waymark on the first line. Then they sailed. They pass Cyprus. They don't actually stop there, but in the text, the Bible mentions the island. So we put that as the next waymark, Cyprus, and then they stop with their first ship. It stops in Myra, and that's a city in the area of Lycia, or that's like a greater area, a region. That's the journey of the first ship. And then the journey continues. They go on the second ship at the same place in Myra, in Lycia. But the ship actually started in Alexandria, which is here in Egypt. And that's what we mark as the first waymark. So the ship is the ship of Alexandria. Alexandria is derived from the name Alexander, which means the defender of the people. So it starts in Alexandria. Oh. And if you heard in that time that if you talked about a ship from Alexandria, then you knew what kind of ship it was, because Alexandria was kind of it was the, how do you call, the wheat barn of Europe, or what did you, something like that. So from Alexandria, they transported wheat to various parts of the Roman Empire. When you heard of a ship of Alexandria, you knew what the cargo was on the ship. It was wheat. It's a wheat ship. We mark wheat at this way mark. And wheat, of course, reminds us of the parable of the wheat and tares. The wheat are the wise. That brings us to the parable of the 10 virgins also. So we are at the beginning of the parable of the 10 virgins.
Janice, we cannot see the board, just so you know.
Oh, yeah. So, so the name Alexandria is positive. We're now being told a positive story, or could be or should be positive. The name is Defender of the People. And that's what both institutions, the US and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, were meant to be, defenders of the people. The US providing the land for people that fled from oppression, and Adventism with its message, with defending the principle of the separation from church and state. Okay. So one important thing that we need to clarify, I mean, I already implied it because I drew the line like this. I drew it parallel to the first, which means what we are now tracing on the second ship is not the time after the Sunday law. It's not a chronological story that continues, but what we are doing is we cut the line here and we do a repeat and enlarge. And we will see that especially when we come here, when we come to verse 13. Okay, this line was verse 1 to 5. And here in Alexandria, it starts at verse 6. Let's start there. We haven't actually read the verse yet, so let's turn to Acts 27, verse 6. Acts 27, verse 6 says, and there the centurion found a ship, so in Myra of Lycia, a ship of Alexandria, sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. So that there they go on board the wheat ship. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and the fact that it was a wheat ship, you can also read it in Acts 27:38. If you just skip to the verse quickly, there it says, and when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. So that's your proof that it's a wheat ship, because when it was necessary, they lightened the ship by throwing out the wheat. We mark the beginning of the line as 1798. We said that's where both institutions, the USA and the SDA Church, are marked in prophecy as beginning. So they begin in the same year. Both are raised up as protector and defender of the people. The USA being the land for people fleeing oppression, and the SDA bringing the message and defending separation of church and state. Yeah, we could go and read that in Great Controversy 440.2. GC 440.2. That's just for your reference. It's the text where Ellen White says, there is only one nation that fulfills, that is a perfect application for the symbol of the second beast. It unmistakably points to the United States of America. And we mark 1798 as the beginning of Seventh-day Adventism. It's the end of the great time prophecies. It's the end of the scattering period and where the gathering starts. We can say that the wheat, or no, not the wheat is gathered. Not really. But what is important also is now we see the two institutions, and every waymark that will follow tells the story of both institutions. If we see something happening to Adventism, we also need to have an application for the US. The next waymark on the journey, I will just show the map again. Share screen. So they go from Myra here. Oh no, the ship started in Alexandria. That's where we were. And now we come to Myra, Lycia. That's where actually Paul and the rest, they get on board. And just as we saw here, we mark bitterness and harvest. Bitter harvest. What date comes to mind when you hear bitterness? What date can we connect to a harvest and to a bitter experience in the Millerite time? Because we know we started at 1798.
It could be April 19, but that would be the Tyrian time then, or October 22nd when we have this.
Yeah.
We think about the bitter.
It's October 22nd, 1844. Because that was the shut door. That's when we see a harvest beginning. There was a harvest after 22nd of October. A text that we could turn to is 17 MR 9.3. There, Ellen White quotes Revelation 10. What she says is, the disappointment of those who expected to see our Lord in 1844 was indeed bitter to those who had so ardently looked for his appearing. So a bitter experience by disappointment. And a shut door. One group of people is harvested. Okay, that's more of an internal application. So we said we will see both the US and SDA at each waymark. If we look at the bitterness and harvest, the disappointment, that's the experience of our internal group. So that would be Seventh-day Adventism. But we should also see an application for the US. So what is the application for the US? In Great Controversy 3.6, Great Controversy GC 376.2. Maybe it's good for you to turn there so you can read along. It's just a short paragraph. I'll give you some time to get there. We read, about this time, so in 1844, a marked change was apparent in most of the churches throughout the US. There had been for many years a gradual but steadily increasing conformity to worldly practices and customs, and the corresponding decline in real spiritual life. But in that year, 1844, there were evidences of a sudden and marked declension in nearly all the churches of the land. While none seemed able to suggest the cause, the fact itself was widely noted and commented upon by both the press and the pulpit. So it was noticed not only internally in the religious world, but also externally. The press even noted and wrote about it, that there is a decline in the churches. And then in the following paragraphs, it says, there were no awakenings, no conversions. So actually what we would probably say, they lose members, churches lose members, and those members who stay, they're not really alive. People don't come to studies. They don't come to talk about the salvation of their souls. That's what one pastor reports. And there is an all-pervading spiritual apathy. Churches generally are becoming sadly degenerate. That's what we read in the following paragraphs. And it also says it's the same in all denominations. So there is a declension in American churches. And that's not, that's all denominations. So that means it's not a Millerite phenomenon or something. We had our SDA application, and this would be the more broad application for the US. It also says further on, I don't know what paragraph, but I'll just read it to you. It's one sentence. With the increase of business and the brightening prospects of commerce and manufacture, there is an increase of worldly mindedness. And then another paragraph down. Such a condition never exists without cause in the church itself. The spiritual darkness which falls upon nations, upon churches and individuals is due not to an arbitrary withdrawal of the divine grace of God, but to neglect or rejection of divine light on the part of men. So there was a message. It was rejected, the first angel's message. We know that churches closed their doors. They didn't want to hear about the soon second advent of Christ. And that's what we mark as a shut door. And there was spiritual darkness that settled in the churches that closed their doors. So that's a spiritual declension that is noticed even in the secular world.
376.3.
Okay.
And then just onwards.
Just, yeah. Oh, it's not 2?
Yeah, it's 2, but then what you read afterwards.
Ah, yeah.
3.
Yeah. Okay. So we could write down spiritual declension.
Businesses was 0.3.
0.3. And then I think 0.4 is the next thing I read. Such a condition. Ah, okay. 2 and 3. And then let's see. Such a condition.
That's 77.3. 377.3.
Okay. Something else, she doesn't say that in this presentation, but I had to think of 1844 being a pivotal year for the US. Do you remember why it was such a pivotal year in the history of the US?
Election. But I don't know which
Yeah.
election anymore, but it was the election.
So we have a spiritual declension, and I'll also put election. You had, it's not so important who it was, but you will remember the names, James Polk and Henry Clay. And who won?
Polk?
Yeah, James Polk, he won. And do you remember the topic, why it was such a pivotal election? What was the topic connected to it that really marked a decided change of the course of the US in politics?
Conspiracy theories?
No.
That was with Adams.
James Polk was an advocate for something in particular. It
Was it not just about slavery?
Henry Clay was.
was kind of connected to slavery. Henry Clay was a Whig.
Opposite.
Do you remember the term manifest destiny? Or expansionism, American expansionism? Because James Polk was an advocate for expansionism, and that was the mindset or the idea. Actually, it's connected to, what was it? American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism is the idea that America was, the glorious land, the chosen land, and they were destined to colonize the land, or that they were destined to expand, grow as a nation, and to make new land their own. So that's the idea of manifest destiny is they go and explore land, discover new land, and they make it their own, regardless of who already lives there. And that included, of course, oppressing the people who already lived there, ripping their countries away from them, and mistreating other people, which is, of course, not what the US was designed to be, because you remember, the name is Defender of the People, and not that they should oppress other people or how do you call that, when you drive someone out their land? Yeah. So I went back in my notes and I found some interesting because yeah, we have the Millerites. They experienced a bitter disappointment. And in another presentation, I think it was from Parminder, we discussed that the fact that the Millerites were completely ignorant about the election, but they thought, they were so focused on Christ's return, they thought the world is going to end, everything is going to stop, so why should we even bother about this election? But we know now in hindsight, we can see this election was so crucial, it was key, it would have been so important for the Millerites to go to vote, to take part in external events. It says in my notes, I'm just going to wait. The Millerites did not take part in politics, and they wouldn't vote because they fanatically focused on religious events only. Expansionism and slavery were not on their radar. Christ was going to come back before the election anyway. The reason for the great disappointment was that they were ignorant about world events. So that implies that had they paid attention to world events, to external events, they wouldn't have had to be disappointed. The problem was not that they were calculating the time, that they were making mathematical gymnastics, or that they set the wrong date. The problem was that they were not reading the signs of the times. If we would understand, in ignoring what happens around them, the Millerites had a warped perspective of the lines of prophecy. Their line was 18 years too short. That, of course, refers to, yeah, why is it then 18 years?
1843. No, 1849.
I think it should not be 18 years.
19.
Yeah, we would end in 1863, right? So they could have anticipated that.
They ended 1844. 1844 was 18.
The chiasm of the 25 to 20.
Also says 19.
Yeah, but 18
Yeah.
1862 ends in 1863.
Okay.
So inclusive reckoning.
Yeah, okay.
Inclusive.
Okay, so we have a bitter disappointment for Adventism, and we have a spiritual declension for the US and elections that decided, that set a different course for the US. Manifest destiny. So they decided not to be the defender of the people, but to oppress them by expanding their land and
That's also bitter.
taking it away. That's also bitter. Yeah, also the election loss was bitter. Yeah. Okay, so that's our second waymark. We read on in Acts 27, verse 7. Acts 27, verse 7. And when we sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone. So they sailed slowly many days, and they came to Cnidus. And here it says there was a wind in the same verse. The wind not suffering us. It was a unfavorable wind. The wind forced them to sail under Crete. I'll show you the map again, and you will clearly see that the ship is diverted from its actual course. Here you see they sail eastward. They reach 𝗏, and then because of the wind, they are forced to go south. And instead of going above Crete in the direction of Italy, which would be closer because they're going to Rome, they had to sail under Crete, which was actually a detour. And 𝗏 we mark as 1863. We mark the ship as going off course. So you had I don't have any space. Have your ship starting here. It is on course, but 1863, it makes a sharp turn and it goes off course. So there are contrary winds. And then they sail under Crete, if that is Crete. Crete means fleshy. And we would connect it to worldliness. What's that getting off course for the US and for the SDA? We have two waymarks. That mark the Civil War. Because, let me just go back. Okay. Okay, let's first discuss Seventh-day Adventism. What's the going off course for Adventism? Any ideas?
They came into darkness.
What did they do?
because
1863.
They started their denomination, or they got their name, they started a church in,
Mm-hmm.
Did not want to fight in the war over slavery.
Yeah. There was a message that they rejected. They rejected a prophetic message about the 2520.
oh, yeah, of course.
They rejected the 2520. And that leads them. We also march because, okay, maybe now that's a bit difficult because we didn't look at the next waymark yet. But that will be 1989. And here we always marked a 126, which is a symbol for the spiritual darkness that the church came into. And we mark 4 generations in this time period. And when we come to 1989, then you have an Adventist church that has no idea about what is the close of probation, never heard about the statue in Daniel 2, the 2300 days, no idea about prophecy. So that's the spiritual darkness or the effects of the spiritual darkness you had during these 4 generations. What about the USA? How do they go off course as a nation? They don't become the nation that they should have turned into. So we saw the US and Adventism are raised up as defenders of the people. That's what they should become. They have time to develop and improve. We know the US have a constitution that enshrines slavery. And they had time to improve and develop. They had time to get rid of slavery. And when they don't, Ellen White says 1861, the US is punished because of the sin of slavery. Abolition of slavery was required of the USA, and that required them to change the constitution. They should have amended their constitution. It's actually what they did. They did that in 1865, right? The 19th Amendment. But what is important to see, you have 2 institutions. They started 1798. The SDA Church has they have the first angel's message, but they have no idea what it means. And they have to learn and grow. And the US, they have their constitution, but they don't actually know what it means. So they need to improve and develop. And because they didn't, 1861 is their punishment.
Was there something special happening in 1863 with the USA then?
It's not discussed in this presentation, but what we do know is that at this 1863 waymark, yeah, there is something. you know, this battle in the Civil War, the Gettysburg Address. There was a Gettysburg Address where Abraham Lincoln sat and he heard the pastor say, "Under God" in his sermon. And then he had the idea, this "under God," we need that in the Constitution. We need, or somehow we need to enshrine God into our Constitution. And that's actually how the National Reform Movement was born. Was it born? How they wanted to enshrine God into their Constitution, and that was actually a mistake. Because there in the Civil War, there was the cause why the North, they wanted to say, God is with us. We are the South with slavery, they are the wicked ones. We are the good ones. So they wanted to make a statement that God is on their side. So they felt the need, we need to make an effort to deserve, or to deserve the grace of God, or whatever how do you say that? We need to have God on our side somehow. So that's why they made all these efforts to print "In God We Trust" on their money later, and have this one nation under God in the Pledge of Allegiance and these things that started here in 1863. I would say that is that's going off course. And I think she's going back to that in later presentations. Okay, so we mark 𝗃𝗶𝗴𝗲𝗏, that's what it means in its root. We mark worldliness, that is of course connected to this state of spiritual darkness that we mark as the 126 from 1863 to 1989. That brings us then, and she also, or the verse also mentions 𝗃𝗟𝗍. 𝗃𝗟𝗍. And that is described as a place in the ocean where waves break on rocks. Waves break on rocks. We already talked about it. When did we talk? When we said that the Sunday law is a flood. Who presented this?
Very.
Oh yeah, maximum flood. Yeah, that's what, oh yeah. That's also what we mark as the Sunday law. The Sunday law as a flood. So this is like waves breaking on the rocks and drawing back again. It's like this flood, and it reminds us of 1863 to 1989, taking in the wine of Babylon, because that's assimilating error. So 𝗃𝗟𝗍 is known as a dangerous point. It was hard to pass. It's also what it says in the verse. Hardly passing, we came to Cnidus. Scars were come, yeah. That brings us to Lasea then. Lasea means wise. We repeat the parable of the 10 virgins. And let's read the verse. Acts 27, verse 8. And hardly passing it, that is talking about 𝗃𝗟𝗍, we came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lycia. Now, when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only for the lading and the ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than Paul, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also. So what it basically says, Paul gives a message. Paul message. They're in Lycia. They stay for a while there. It says when much time was spent. And then it got so late that it was actually dangerous to leave because the fast was now already past. That's somewhere in autumn. And it is known that it's a dangerous time to sail from there because of tempests. Oh yeah, let's read Acts 27 verse 13. So Paul says, no, we shouldn't go because it's dangerous. It's too dangerous. We know that there's a great danger that we will get into a tempest. But the people on the ship, the crew, didn't want to listen to Paul.
Which verse?
We read Acts 27 verse 13. So they get on the ship, and when the south wind blew softly, so we mark here a south wind. South wind. Supposing that they had obtained their purpose, losing thence, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called 𝗂𝗚𝗴𝗲𝗃. So you had a south wind. South is a symbol for the king of the south that is going down. We know the rule, if you had the south wind, the east wind is going to follow. After the south wind, the east wind follows, and that's 𝗂𝗚𝗴𝗃𝗲𝗃. And we mark that as Islam. 9/11. Because of the east wind being a symbol for Islam. You have 1989, the fall of the Soviet Union, the symbol being the south wind that blows. It's a favorable wind for them to sail. Paul warns them not to, but they decide to sail anyway, and they get into the storm, 𝗂𝗚𝗴𝗃𝗃𝗃, that we mark as 9/11.
Do we really jump in this line from 1863 to 1989?
Yeah.
Happens a lot between.
And I purposely lined them up because oh no,
You didn't.
I didn't. Because I thought, hey, I'm missing a waymark here, but I skipped one here.
It's okay.
I meant
Just-
to line
just-
them.
just-
No, I'm going to line them up.
No, just do like that.
I meant to line them up.
Maak een stippellijntje.
No, that was the whole purpose of the presentation.
How can you line them up then?
I'm going to line them up here.
Oh, 1989.
A little bit smaller. The 9/11.
I can remember.
Okay.
So they come into the storm. Verse 14. Let's go and read. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called 𝗂𝗚𝗴𝗲𝗏. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. So they had no chance against the wind to steer or anything. So they needed just to be cast by the wind. How do you say? To be driven away by the wind. And running under a certain island, which is called 𝗂𝗚𝗴𝗲𝗏, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they, or verse 17, which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands. So it's about the undergirding here. They had to take ropes, someone standing on that side of the ship. You have a ship, you have someone stand on that side and someone else on that. Of course, these are super old boats, ships, and they throw a rope like that under the ship and pull it together so that they would hold the boat, hold the ship together, so that it doesn't fall apart and the water doesn't go in between these wood planks. Okay, and then we are still have 2 waymarks in front, or 3 actually. But unfortunately, it will not line up anymore. So this needs to be. Let's read. In verse 27. I'm just thinking, should we read everything or should we just jump there? So we see it in verse 17, they undergird the ship, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest. They lighten the ship. And verse 20, they lost all hope. It says in verse 20, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. In verse 21, something changes. Let's read from verse 21. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth. He stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me. Because, you remember, he gave a message here. He said, let's not go because this is going to be super dangerous. You should have listened to me and not have loosed from Crete and to have gained this harm and loss. Verse 22. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. So the ship is going to be damaged, but we will not be damaged. Verse 23. For there stood by me this night an angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve. So he has a message from God, from the angel of God, saying, verse 24, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Therefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe that it shall be even as it was told me. So he believes the message of God. We won't be hurt, only the ship. Verse 26, howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Verse 27, but when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. So we mark the 14th night and midnight in Acts 27, verse 27. We mark that as the midnight cry because that's the time when the shipmen, they spotted land, and it says a cry arose, right?
And sounded. That's that they're trying to see
Yeah.
how deep it is.
Okay. That's when they spot the land. And midnight, midnight.
And it's 14th night.
Verse 26.
So this 14th night, midnight, you should write it down. Remark.
No,
Back.
because you have Paul. He gives a message again. He says, this message, okay, let's write it like this. You have Paul says, we will be shipwrecked. Points to this. Which is this one. And that is like swelling, this message is swelling to a cry until they spot the land. The cry is not written in the verse, but it says, but then the 14th night was come as we were driven up. About midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. So you can imagine they would have cried out, we spot the land. So now, so they are here, they know we are going to be shipwrecked. So we are going to, and at the next waymark, they calculate the time, the distance to the land. That's what we read in verse 28, when they sounding, they measure the distance between them, between their ship and the land that they will hit. They sounded first 20 fathoms. 20 fathoms. 1 fathom, like the measurement is the length of the rope that they put in the sea. And there is a little weight at the end of the rope.
You have the knots. When you have on the rope, you have some knots.
Yeah, and so they measure the depth of the sea, and then after a certain while they measure again, and by the difference they can tell how fast they are approaching the land. So, or how fast they, are approaching it. 1 fathom is 72 inches. 20 fathoms, 1,414 inch. And then they measure again, 15 fathoms. 1,080 inch. In verse 28. And if you add these up, these two, you end up with 2520 inch. Inches. And 2520 is a symbol for time. Parminder says the 2520 unlock time. So what they are measuring is the time to shipwreck. And in other presentations, we saw that Exeter, or the midnight cry, is always the formalization, sorry, is a waymark that is connected to time. We had on the line of the priests, we had 1996, Time of the End magazine, 2012 was the prediction of the Sunday law in 2014. 2018 was the midnight cry and the prophecy of November 9 as the close of probation. November 9, close of probation. And then we had another Exeter 2021, radical feminism. But I'm not sure, did we connect time to that yet?
Ariane did. We didn't yet. We were searching for it. What was the time prediction in 2021?
Oh, what?
And Ariane said there were 4 anchors.
The 4 anchors. Oh,
Joe Biden.
Aha, yeah, of course. But
So-
how does he link that to 21?
Then
Because
that
that's
was
when he
when
starts.
started. So there were 4 years of 4 anchors, 4 years of Joe Biden until the Sunday law.
No.
Huh? But we will hear that next week.
Yeah, and because that's on the scale of the priests. And that's a different scale to this. That's on the line of the institutions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we can reconcile that.
I just wanted to ask what it says under 2021. I cannot read it.
Radical feminism and 4 anchors.
That's Arjen talked about.
That's not set in stone. And of course, that's, as I said, that's on the scale of the priests, but on the scale of the 144,000. 𝗶𝗹, you have 𝗶𝗹. 𝗶𝗹 is the formalization of the Sunday law. And that should be connected to time as well. Should be able to connect time to 𝗶𝗹.
It's next week.
Excellent. So that's the repeating pattern we talked about in the very first presentation of this series. You have Boston, a message arrives. Concord, the message increases or it swells. There's an increase of knowledge. And then you have Exeter, where a test, no, not a test. The message is formalized and it's connected to a time element. And then the test, which is Boston again. But yeah. So that's the second chip. And we haven't gone through every verse. There are a lot more details. Because if you think about it, the first chip is verses 1 to 5. It's 5 verses. The second chip is verses 6 to 44. So that's nearly 40 verses. There would be a lot more details to dive into. But with the points we have so far, there are certain anchor points that help us to build a framework. There are certain characteristics that we recognize that help us to build a structure. And that's the structure we are left with so far. And we're left with a structure where this midnight cry is 𝗶𝗹, or yeah, if we see that there is 9/11, between 9/11 and shipwreck that we mark as the Sunday law, there are 2 smaller waymarks, which are called raphia and 𝗶𝗹. We see that 𝗶𝗹 becomes a midnight cry. And that's, as we discussed earlier, in the, I think also in the first presentation of the series, with the repeating pattern, with all the fractals that we discussed, we saw on the lines of agriculture, on the other reform lines that we discussed so far, 𝗶𝗹 is never a midnight cry. So that's, we're going to leave this problem open for now. But in the following presentation, we're going to try to understand why, and we're going to explain this problem. Okay. Maybe just to shortly recap, we looked at the second chip that brings us from Myra to shipwreck. But if you track the ship from where it actually started, it's Alexandria in Egypt. It's a wheat ship that comes from there. It goes to Myra. That's where Paul gets on board. We know it traces the history of the United States and Adventism as two institutions. They both have their beginning in 1798. They are raised up to be defenders of the people. That's what the name Alexandria means. The US being the land for people who flee oppression. Adventism with the message, with the first angel's message, or the three angels' messages, and them advocating for the separation of church and state. We get to Myra, Lycia, we mark bitterness and harvest. We saw for Adventism that meant the great disappointment. For the US, a spiritual declension across all churches, but also a pivotal election that Adventism in turn didn't pay attention to. And because they didn't pay attention to elections in external events, they were disappointed. Because if they had studied external events, they would have been able to understand prophecy correctly. Because they didn't pay attention to the external, their perspective was warped. Okay, then we get to Nidus, 1863. That's where the ship that was, first it was on course, now it diverts from its course because there are contrary winds. The SDA Church rejects the 2520. They reject a prophetic message that leads them into spiritual darkness. We mark 126 years from 1863 to 1989. And 126 is a symbol for the 2520. These 4 generations mark a steady fall. So, yeah, the steady fall in this spiritual darkness. So that when you come to 1989, Adventism has no idea what the first angel's message is. Or, no, let me see. No, of course they. Adventism here, they had no idea what the first angel's message meant. They had time to learn, but instead they went into darkness again. USA, they had no idea about what their constitution actually means. They had time to learn and improve, but instead they go into darkness as well because they take on the course of, they want to actually make the constitution Christian. They think it would be a good idea to enforce religion, which is not their purpose, which is actually what they profess not to do because they are a lamb-like beast. Okay, so they go, both institutions go of course, and after a long period of darkness, we get to the time of the end again, to 1989, where both the US and SDA, they have their purpose. Oh, yeah. So the US, wait, I had a good comparison. So Adventism, they have no idea anymore what kind of church they actually are. As we said, they have forgotten about prophecy, the old paths. They wouldn't even know what these old paths are that they want to, or that they are called to return to prophecy, to Daniel, to the 2300 years. And the same with the US. They have no idea what it means to be the glorious land. And then you have people like, you have people that think they are going to make America great again, but they have no idea what that actually means. Okay, so 𝗏, they stay there for a while. And when they want to leave, it's actually too late. It's not a good season anymore to leave. Paul warns them about this fact. He says, no, we should stay here because there's a great danger. We get into a tempest. But the people, the crew of the ship, they say, no, it's a favorable south wind. We will go. So they get on the ship. The south wind blows, but what follows is the east wind, which is a tempestuous wind. So they get into a storm. We mark that as 1989, the fall of the king of his south, marked by the south wind. Fall of the king of the south, the Soviet Union from 1989 to 1991. We get to 9/11, Euroclydon. The east wind is a symbol for Islam. And then when we continued in the verses, we saw Paul gives a message. We are going to be shipwrecked. Don't be afraid. The ship is going to break, but we are going to be safe. So they point to the shipwreck at the end of the line. And there is a cry that swells. At the 14th night, at midnight, there is the time when the people spot land on the ship, and they measure the time that they still have to go from where they are to the shipwreck or to the land.
You see in sketches of the life of Paul, there's not a cry mentioned, but they do report it that they're near some land.
Okay.
So they reported it.
What quote is it? What reference?
I would from because nowadays it doesn't say it anymore. It's level for 267.2.
Okay. So they measure the distance to the shipwreck. We saw the measurement is 2520 when calculated together or added up together, which symbolizes, which is a symbol for time again. We saw it here already. So yeah. Connecting the midnight cry, Penium, to the characteristic of time. And next time we're going to understand why on earth Penium is a midnight cry, when that's not the case on any of the other reform lines. Let's close with a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for this study. Thank you for these truths, where we get so many details that we don't understand yet. There are so many hints and anchor points, so many events that we need to give a place in history, but you gave us some anchor points that we can hold fast to to see a structure, to see repeating patterns, to see certain characteristics that are familiar, that feel familiar, that we can hold fast to build a structure. Thank you that you navigate us through the complex, that you help us with structures, making the complex a little easier, so that we can better understand what you want to tell us. Help us to internalize these truths, and that we will also be able to understand future events, and that we will recognize them when they are in front of us. Please bless your movement across, around the world, and be with us for the rest of this Sabbath. Amen.